Get started. First thing on the agenda is an executive session regarding potential litigation in accordance with 1 MRSA 4056E. I'm thinking, Jim, that's you.
I'll make a motion to enter into executive session regarding potential litigation in accordance with 1 MSRA 4056E.
Anyone care to second that? All those in favor? Anyone opposed?
Those in favor? This is supposed to be a discussion prior to that, though, but it's okay.
Video is on?
Okay.
All right, thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Thank you.
The minutes of November 10th.
I make a motion to accept the minutes as presented for November 10th.
Anyone care to second that?
You do it, right?
Did I hear a second?
Who made the motion? I'm sorry.
I'll second that.
All those in favor? Anyone opposed?
I will abstain, Steve, because I was not present.
Thank you. December 1st, workshop.
I'll make another motion to accept those minutes of the workshop from December 1st.
Thank you. Anyone care to second that?
I'll second it.
Thank you. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? Thank you. Consent agenda, financial quarterly update. Heather, that would be you.
All right, do you still want a presentation even though it's under consent? Because typically consent doesn't have presentations and stuff. So I guess I just want to clarify.
This is the new format, and I know with Kevin's agenda is just kind of looking at how to explain that a little bit.
I wish you would, thank you.
Yes, but the three things that are under consent is that you've got them to read in your packet. And if you had any questions about them, they would ask to remove them from the consent agenda.
So a motion will get into discussion.
Right.
I'll make a motion to accept the consent agenda A, B, and C.
Thank you. Anyone care to second that?
Second.
All those in favor?
Oh, and discussion now, right?
Sure, if you'd like.
Is there any discussion on what folks have read?
That you can't, once you vote on a consent, there's no discussion.
So discussion.
You have to pull it off to be able to
Okay.
discuss it.
So
But you
if
still
someone-
could if you want to back that
If
up.
someone had to say something, I can back my motion out, right?
No, right.
Anyone need to say anything? All right. We're ready for vote then, I guess.
All those in favor? Anyone opposed?
It's okay.
Yep. I'm not used to this.
That's okay. So the public comment, we just moved up, that's all. Then public comment.
Public comment is open, or?
Open session?
Open session for public comment.
Eric Cousins, I work for City of Auburn, and I just wanted to take a minute of the board's time to talk about some considerations that we're hoping to discuss in Auburn. Next Wednesday, the 16th, we've been coordinating with Sid to have a meeting with the Auburn Water Districts, but we would definitely encourage any members of LawPac or Lewiston Water District if you're interested. Our goal is to really make sure that as we have a discussion about the recommendations of the Lake Auburn Watershed study that we completed last year, and hopefully make some of the changes that can lessen the cost to Auburn taxpayers of watershed protections over time, and allow some flexibility of land use within the watershed in a responsible way. That we're engaged with everybody that's responsible for protecting the lake and providing affordable water to the two communities. I think there is some sense of urgency to have these discussions, so just want to ask that you guys have open ears, give it thoughtful consideration. Think about the science of wastewater disposal and phosphorus control, and what the city's doing as far as trying to improve drainage with a major project along Route 4. That will improve drainage around the lake, lessen the risk along that corridor. There are a lot of consistencies between the 2021 watershed study and the recommendations with the 2010 watershed management plan that's on the Protection Commission's website, and I think is the most current plan. I think there's a chance here to really accomplish a lot of the items that were identified 12 years ago, 11 years ago. In that 2010 watershed management plan, and the items that have been identified in the 2021 plan, and deliver better science around wastewater disposal, physical improvements along Route 4 and other roadways, reducing phosphorus runoff to the lake, and really moving away from the traditional way that we've tried to manage phosphorus, where the lake had a budget for phosphorus, and everybody got to contribute the amount of phosphorus that they could contribute based on the acreage that they owned within that watershed and the established budget. The new standards, I think, can deliver better development that doesn't just allow somebody to generate a certain amount of phosphorus based on the acreage that they own, but actually can provide science-based treatments and infiltration on their lots that not only can make each project a little better, but actually could deliver more development with less impact, which clearly the City of Auburn's goal is to grow housing opportunities, some within the city, including some within the Lake Auburn watershed. I think the urgency to have these discussions is here, and some of it is beyond our control, so I'm just hoping to have a thoughtful discussion about what is within our control to try to make that the most current science and the best protections available to the lake. LD 1884 has a public hearing on Monday. That may eliminate our ability to use income standards throughout the agricultural zone in judging where a house can be built. That's a state level decision at this point. I know a lot of you are aware that another piece at the state level is that the Housing Committee recently drafted a report, and the legislature is considering mandating that anywhere that a single family is allowed, that a 4-unit can be built. That really takes away a lot of local control, and I think our best bet is to have in place standards that provide the best wastewater treatment and the best phosphorus and the best buffering standards we can have. So that's it, and I invite you to attend next Wednesday at 6 p.m. if you're interested. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I think in light of conversations, we need to make sure we have a representative that we appreciate show up at that meeting.
I know I'm going.
Yeah, I think as many of us as we should, we should all try to make an attempt to get there. Starts at 6 p.m., probably done at 7:30.
Pettingill Park?
7:30.
Down at Pettingill Park, is that where?
Yes, at the Senior Community Center, 6 p.m. And we'll be getting some social media resources out, as well as notices, and we'll make sure the commission's copied on those.
Thank you.
It's not intended to be a big public engagement meeting. It's open to the public, certainly, but we expect there'll be more public meetings later that are intended to reach a larger audience, but we want to engage with the commission
Thank you.
and boards.
Will it be recorded for those that can't attend?
I can check. Our recording abilities there are limited. It's not a mic'd room, so we can get a recording, but the audio is not always great.
Mike, we'll be recording the Water District meeting prior, so we'll have the equipment there if we have the extra capability to record that one as well.
Bring an extension cord.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Staff clerk report. There's Kevin.
So, there was some discussion, and I think this is a new report, something that we put together to try to give some background so you guys could read prior to coming to the meeting to address any questions or versus us just giving you a narrative, so that would shorten some of your time for other discussions, new business or open sessions on any of those topics. So I'm not going to go through it in any great detail unless somebody has any specific questions. I think we've tried to look at and give you some background on some of the important stuff. The Lake Auburn study, that one is a big document. I know Sid and I are going through it along with Erica to be able to give you some recommendations. Outline is what the recommendations are that Eric was just talking about that can be discussed specifically for the septic. Proposed septic ordinance changes. I know I've asked, I know Sid has asked, I think you've gotten a letter back from the drinking water program and that representative, just to fully understand, because we did submit one application for a filtration waiver, plural, waivers. So it was one application, it was a joint effort back when we submitted it, and it was accepted and approved. So we actually have two drinking water waivers. Auburn Water has one, Lewiston Water has another one. So we are two drinking water systems. We happen to be working collaboratively in this organization as well as operations level, our treatment facility and all of that. So I think that's one thing to point out, that we're both trying to understand as operations on the districts and watershed, but then also coming together on the watershed to understand what the real impacts are. So future considerations for a zoning change along where the pits are right now. That one, I don't see, unless Sid wants to speak up, but I think that process does reflect the watershed boundary change. The information is there. My concern would be if there's anything coming into there that was looking to have a use that could have a potential spill or something that caused contamination. If you had industry or anything going on like that, no large storage facilities, and I know that I haven't heard anything like that being proposed there, but some of the uses were pretty broad. At the Lake Auburn, we had gaseous chlorine, for example. So failure of those tanks, we had a plan for off-site. So if there is any type of proposed activities like that in this proposed watershed boundary change, that would, I think, be a concern that we bring to this board as well as our own concerns. So, other than that, was there any other questions as far as the report? Format changes, additional detail?
I do know last night there was a planning board meeting and I caught the last half of it. Eric, if you don't mind, did we adopt or are going to send a favorable recommendation as a city of Auburn to the council for Grace Lawn?
Yes.
And then, did I also hear that any kind of development that happens within that has to come back to the planning board with public notice, et cetera, or is it going to be a free-for-all for General?
Three or more units or buildings over 5,000 square feet would definitely have to go back to planning.
That's at 140-something acres?
Yeah.
Eric, I had a question. I was sort of yelling at my TV yesterday. I was really frustrated that I couldn't be there.
But you're the chair now.
Yeah, I know, right? So, the way the watershed boundary is written is incredibly similar to the AWD. We heard that, and I guess I'd have to look to see what the specific changes are. But the language defines the boundary, and then it says that that boundary will be delineated on a map. But the boundary is really described in language that says, like, anything that's flowing into Lake Auburn is part of the watershed, right? And then we'll make a map to show where that is. If there were development at the site that were to change the flow of either groundwater or surface water, would that automatically kick in a change to the watershed boundary? because the watershed boundary describes in language, it doesn't say like these, it's not like a, it's, right, it's not like a deed, right, where you get
Means and bounds.
means and bounds, yeah.
There's the physical drainage area that is the watershed, and then I think there's this zoning mechanism. I still think it requires a vote, but I know that staff, and I don't believe the planning board would approve a development that directed stormwater across that line.
Oh,
into the
absolutely
watershed.
not, yeah, I think I could.
So I think we have a mechanism to make sure that that doesn't happen, but I do think if it was changed and somebody was proposing development in the area that changed, we would have to take a vote to planning board recommend and council approve an amendment to the boundary, just as we did with this change.
Okay, because that was, to me, that was interesting, because there's the map, which shows a boundary, but then there's the language that describes where the boundary ought to be. I should have asked Jim when he was here, actually, because it wasn't part of that executive session. It was an interesting question, like, which one of those carries, right? Okay, thank you, Eric.
Can I ask on that piece of property, does it affect the Berry property? Is that
no,
outside of that 100 and some odd acres?
outside of that?
Yeah, thank you.
But it butts it, doesn't it? Just,
I
isn't it
agree.
right there, Hunter's little thing going on?
And Gendron's in there working now.
Yeah, so it butts that.
Yeah.
So it was just that water thing that's going ahead with the planning recommendation, the rest was just discussion at planning board?
And there was a recommendation to move forward with updating the phosphorus standards to the main DEP's most current standard and low impact development techniques. Those were the two that affect the watershed.
Can I ask you a question, Eric? So at the end of the meeting, I think it was Councilor LeBlanc brought up the household and the income requirement for the ag zone. And the way that she worded that, so is that something that will be a planning board agenda item to come?
So,
Or is staff looking into that?
yes, I think so, but I need to look at the tape because I
Okay.
didn't fully understand exactly what the wording, whether or
Okay.
not the wording said a date. And we're supposed to talk to the city council about LD 1884 and the income standards at the second meeting in March.
Okay.
So I just don't want to cause a problem with the process by going to the planning board before that.
I was wondering that, where it is a state piece of legislature versus looking at it at the city level. I mean, I understand the interest, but I didn't know if that one might come before another.
If the city manager has asked me to prepare to provide recommendations on that at the second council meeting in March. So I need to talk to him about how to handle that motion. But we don't really have room on the agenda in March for planning board. So what I'm recommending is we wait till April after the council talks about it.
I suspect that was probably an effort to try to get ahead of the state law,
Yeah.
I guess.
I think I said Councilor LeBlanc, I didn't
Yeah.
know that planning board.
Yeah, planning board, yeah.
Yeah.
That's sort of the discussion that's going on is, you know, it's gonna have major implications for us. So you kinda don't wanna wait. You don't want the rules to change and then have nothing put in place.
So just mention that you appointee from Wilson as well.
Oh, yes, sorry. So, new city councilor Rick LaChapelle has been appointed to this commission. He was excited. I've talked to him a little bit, but he had a trip already planned out of the country, so he wasn't able to make this meeting. But he is excited to participate, meet everyone, and will be at the next meeting, so. That's all I have, unless you have any other questions.
Thank you. My other question is, this new agenda has got me on my heels here. Heather got away from us. There was a question about replacing her as our finance director.
So Heather was charged, as I understand, Heather was charged with coming with a recommendation for a proposed person. she does have that person. I don't think she was able to talk with you about it today, but she does have a person in mind, so that'll be forthcoming, I guess.
She wanted to finish up the audit, so the Watershed books were audited,
Right.
and that's why we got that late update on the financials as well, so.
Right. And I think there's been another email that I've seen that there's some questions about other candidates for that position, and it's up to the commission to vet those and take acceptance and recommendations and go through that process, I would imagine. So,
Steve
Heather-
Mills has sent a letter from the Auburn Water District as president to maybe entertain another candidate.
Heather has been from inception, has been the treasurer, so we haven't gone through that process before. So we've got another new process for you guys to take on.
So Heather's certainly familiar with staff over at Lucent. Has anyone reached out to Auburn City Hall to ask, talk to Phil, to ask if anyone over there would be qualified and interested? That was something that the commissioners had asked about.
I reached out to our staff internally to see if anyone would be interested. No one really jumps forward, but we did not check with the city of Auburn about any candidates there. Could certainly do that.
I don't know how everyone else feels. I'd be interested in that only because, you know, the more candidates you have to choose from, I think the better choice you can make. I know we're also talking about municipal employees. I guess I have a question. Does it have to be someone who works for either Lewiston or Auburn? If someone found a very competent accountant who was, you know,
No, I think you can,
privately
the budget's
employed.
$2,500, and, you know, we have the meetings and
Yeah.
the certain list of tasks.
I know, that's the bigger
Yeah.
thing. How are you going to get a private accountant from here?
I know.
$500.
Not a lot, but, yeah, I think at the very minimum, ask Auburn for sure. And if anyone knows anybody, I mean, why not look at whatever applications, we can put it at our next meeting to pass them around before then, and these are the 3 candidates, or I think you need to get 2 signatures on the check sometimes, so I don't know what that protocol is. You know, do you want to keep that within, having, like, Steve's far away, so like, who's our second signer? That's more convenient maybe to listen, that probably isn't to us.
So we still have Heather for a while.
Yeah.
And I was under the impression that the last time we talked about this, that we were going to have a heck of a job finding anybody. And now it looks like there might be another avenue or two, so good for us. I guess Heather's been here since the inception of this commission, and it's just one more thing we got to deal with.
We should probably think about how we'd like to recognize her. We've been
That's a good
probably
point.
remiss in the last couple of years with COVID on some of the former commissioners that have
Absolutely.
left this group. So we definitely appreciate all the time and effort, and I think that minimal pay for the time and effort she's put in, I think we would want to consider doing something to recognize her service and the contribution she's had here.
Somewhere, somebody had, I think it was you, Dan, had a nice picture of the lake, and something like that, in a nice frame, maybe with a clock in it or something.
I think a plaque would be great. She says she doesn't like plaques. I think we should definitely give her one. Lifetime supply of chocolate.
She still needs to pass our budget.
Right, she might prefer,
not
I don't know, a
instigate.
year's supply of chocolate, I don't know. But I think we should bounce around some ideas.
Yeah.
Good idea.
Chocolate.
Maybe a piece of chocolate in the shape
Yeah,
of a
that's
lake.
true, that would actually be it. We talked to the chocolatier, and all we talked about.
Anything else, Kevin?
That's it, unless
Thank
anyone
you.
has any other detailed report. I think Erica in the future agenda is going to get into more detail of some items that we.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
We all wrapped up, Kevin?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm on here for the Lake Auburn study highlights and discussion. So the key highlights of that study really can be found in the executive summary and section 5, which are included in the agenda packet. They basically pull out a really key points from each of the sections that are discussed in much more detail. So I just wanted to go over some of those points with you guys. This is the first time we've talked about it at a commission meeting. And so I'll just go over the executive summary first, and then if there are questions or comments, we can talk about it. And then I'll do the same thing with section 5. And again, my discussion here is really what pieces apply to the watershed, of course, and more specifically for the commission. There are some other pieces in here that are important, but maybe aren't in the interest of the commission at this time. Maybe further down the road they will be. So looking at the executive summary, a couple of points I wanted to call out here. The consultants said, it's under section 2, analysis of regulatory impact in the executive summary, that we found that the regulatory framework for the protection of Lake Auburn as a water supply is mostly robust and effective, which I think speaks to the Commission's mission and implementation of watershed protection measures over the years, local ordinances, that type of thing. And they go on to say we recommend several revisions that will better align regulations with the best available science and state and regional norms and apply them more fairly across different land uses and activities. So getting into that a little bit is this first bullet of aligning the septic system regulations contained in the Lake Auburn Watershed Overlay District Ordinance with the best available science and main septic system regulations. So we've talked about that a little bit already. Again, that's something that was part of the study. The City Council for Auburn on January 3rd decided to have that looked into further, so they sent that to Planning Board, but that hasn't been on a Planning Board agenda yet. I believe that is to come on the agenda for the Planning Board meeting that was last night. It was at the end of the agenda possibly for March, but I didn't see any formal discussion on that, so.
We're trying to bring it to the March plan.
Okay. Okay. So that is something the Planning Board will be looking at. Part of that was in Kevin's report, so just so that's on everybody's radar, that is something that will be looked at the city level. A couple other recommendations in this section: develop a clear set of standards for farm management that will limit phosphorus loading from commercial agricultural activities. I don't see any issue with that. And another bullet is incorporate low impact development requirements for new single family residential development. Low impact development is mentioned quite a few times in this study. A couple sentences I think were contradictory about it. You know, it can be helpful on a small scale, but it shouldn't be taken that you can have massive development, and if it's all low impact development, that's okay. Because that kind of, those benefits quickly can outweigh, the cost can quickly outweigh the benefits of that if you're kind of going crazy with building homes, even though they're low impact development. Section 3, the analysis of environmental impact. A couple statements I thought were important. The consultants say, we find that Lake Auburn reached a tipping point in the 2010s where key environmental thresholds were reached or passed. Level of phosphorus rose above 10 parts per billion, and elevated risks of algae blooms, and forested land cover dipped below 75% of the land area. So what we saw in the 2010s was fish kill, an algae bloom and fish kill, I think in 2011. 2018 we had algae growth problems, we did a copper sulfate treatment. 2019 we followed that up with alum treatment. So they're just acknowledging that within these last 10 years we've seen a lot of changes. And we're continuing to, you know, we monitor water quality in the lake all through open water season. So from those changes, a lot of studies were done on our end and have informed us on what we needed to do for water quality monitoring. They also want to say future scenarios that ease restrictions on residential growth will result in higher concentrations of phosphorus and higher risk of algae blooms. So there is acknowledgement of that connection between development, phosphorus, algae blooms. So that's something for us to keep in mind too. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
And again, I mentioned requiring low impact development makes a small but significant positive impact on phosphorus and the risk of algae growth. So for our end, for looking at water quality day in and day out, just so you guys know, we do algae sampling, so we're keeping an eye on all these things. But I think an overarching theme of this report, and it's highlighted and bolded in different sections, is, a big increase in development leads to a decline in water quality, which I think we all kind of know, but that's reiterated several times throughout this. They also talked about economic impacts, and one of the key pieces for that section, they say, we find that the added benefits to Auburn are mostly or entirely offset by increased costs to Lewiston, resulting in negligible net economic benefit to the communities served by Lake Auburn. So, as part of this study, the consultants ran different development scenarios and modeling, and this was their conclusion, that there's almost no benefit to increased development in the watershed for stakeholders. They highlight that a couple times throughout this report, too. Also in the executive summary, under section 5, this spells out summary of their key findings, which I think are really important. So I would like to talk about them if we have some time. The first one is the City of Auburn should not seek to ease current resource protection zoning, which we've talked about today too. So that the city had looked at changing some of the rural residential zoning last year and low density country residential zoning. And ultimately, those changes did not pass, and I think those changes would have contradicted this recommendation, actually, because those changes were looked at near the ag zone, mostly on the northern part of the lake. So this study doesn't recommend easing any current resource protection zoning. They also say increased density and new opportunities for residential development are better suited to other areas of Auburn outside of the Lake Auburn watershed, which we've talked about too. That resolution that the commission put forth a couple years ago basically said that, said if you want to make changes in the ag zone, okay, but just leave the watershed out of it. They recommend the planning board and city council take up the recommended ordinance revisions, which we've talked about. So that's part of that is the watershed boundary change down by Grace Lawn Pit, and the possible changes for septic ordinance. I think this is important too, that we share these findings with all of our stakeholders, right? So City of Auburn, City of Lewiston, Auburn Water District, the Commission, we've all seen this, but I know internally we've shared it with some of our partners too, like Lake Stewards in Maine, Maine DEP, Drinking Water Program, so everybody knows that this is out there, and that a lot of work in the City of Auburn is going to be referencing this document. They go on to mention that City of Auburn, Auburn Water Districts, and City of Lewiston, and the Commission should fully collaborate with local governments, land trusts, private landowners, and other potential partners in the upper Lake Auburn watershed to control development and limit phosphorus loading. So I'm going to talk about this a little bit later too. I've started to work with Alan to talk about what does Turner have in place for regulations or policies that can help control or limit, phosphorus loading in those upper reaches of the watershed that eventually, as we know, come down and affect Lake Auburn and affect everybody else. So we're going to keep that going. I'm going to work more with Alan and Turner, and then I'll probably be calling you, Steve, to talk to the other towns too, because that's an important point. We definitely all can continue working together and hopefully do some more in the future. A couple other suggestions here probably are more for staff to do gap analysis, looking at our monitoring plan, continue working with Bates College, which we do for monitoring. And they recommend consider creating a technical science advisory board for the commission to establish or maintain key local, state, and regional partnerships for review and guidance on water quality issues. So that's a recommendation that would be up to you guys. I just wanted to throw it out there that that's included in this report. If the commission wanted to have a technical science advisory board, we certainly know people who might be good candidates for that. But that's only if you see a need for that.
This point's been made before, maybe we need to hear it again. If you have to put a treatment plant in tomorrow, what does that do to this group and the efforts made in the watershed?
Yeah, so we would still need to keep our watershed protection efforts up, because if you put in a filtration plant, if you completely pollute your lake or you can have continual noxious algae blooms, you can only filter out so much. And you can't always end up filtering out some of the toxins that are associated with cyanobacteria that have negative human health impacts. So you still need to have your protections in place. And that's one of the things that was part of this study too. They looked at other water utilities in the state. They looked at Kennebec Water District, which is filtered, and they use China Lake as their water source. But they still have protections in place. They still have undeveloped land, you know, and they've struggled in the past with algae blooms and, you know, reduced water quality. And they also talk about, on the complete other end of the spectrum, Portland Water District, who has a huge watershed, but a lot of it is still forested. And they also don't filter. So even if they had, well, I don't want to speak for them, but I imagine if they filtered, that they would still maintain watershed protections as well. I'm guessing there. Yeah.
That statement is on page 61, halfway down the left.
Thank you, yeah. Yep.
The key takeaway is that decreased intake water quality at a filtration plant taxes the system, raises the volume of waste stream, and adds significant cost and complexity to the treatment process, meaning that water supply managers cannot forego water quality protection efforts simply because the filtration system is in place.
Did that answer your question, or you're actually asking about the charter?
It really did. It did. I guess the point I want to make is, if there's a treatment plant tomorrow, it wouldn't lessen anything we're doing.
No, I mean, the commission is required because we have a watershed management plan, because we're on a waiver of filtration. So this organization, I would think, would turn into some other sort of lake conservation, like the Little Wilson Pond organization or something like that.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't be a requirement, because we would no longer be on a waiver of filtration.
But the efforts to protect the watershed wouldn't lessen.
No, I mean, any lake or pond around here has some sort of group with it. Even Taylor Pond has an association.
And the reference that was made in the report, they're actually talking to Superintendent Roger Krause. He's a former drinking water program administrator, thorough knowledge of it. So he went from a regulator to a regulated, and is pretty knowledgeable in this. So, you know, when the comparisons are like this, it adds definitely some merit. They talked to some good people.
Yeah, they did. And that's kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but while we're on it, in the report they summarized that these comparisons with other water supply lakes demonstrate that the protections surrounding Lake Auburn do not exceed those of China Lake, Sebago Lake, or Floods Pond. The restrictions on recreational opportunities at Lake Auburn are similar to those at other drinking water supplies, including filtered and unfiltered sources. Similarly, land use restrictions within the Lake Auburn watershed are far from the most prohibitive among the examples discussed, with only 20% of the watershed held or managed as water supply land compared to 99% of the Floods Pond watershed, and that's up in Bangor. So they do bring that up and offer some comparisons, which is helpful. I don't think we're the only lake in the state that's a drinking water supply that has these types of, you know, questions or concerns from the public or the municipalities. The executive summary has a couple points on not allowing swimming, only allowing small watercraft. That's not much of a change. Point number 8, they say the Lake Auburn Watershed Protection Commission should coordinate with local youth conservation groups or AmeriCorps to perform annual maintenance of trails. I thought that was interesting. It's pretty specific to call out Youth Conservation Corps or AmeriCorps. I think we have some other local groups that could be helpful with that too. That seems like an odd, like, why spell out those exact groups?
Part of the University of Maine affiliation with the study.
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking they're big with those conservation corps.
And we're doing a trial program for a Lost and Youth Corps this year.
Oh, okay.
6 weeks, so we can go over for sure.
Yeah. But they didn't talk to you guys, did they?
Nope.
Okay.
Seemed to be a key stakeholder, but
Yeah.
I called Forrest because I didn't know him, but.
They also mentioned, surveying horse manure.
Mhm.
And then this was a interesting point that I think maybe we'll go into a workshop at some point, I don't know. But finally it is recommended that the city acquire permanent recreational trail easements on commission properties with trails for guaranteed public access in the future. I thought that was interesting because the commission purchased properties with the primary goal of water quality protection, and recreation is a secondary benefit for sure. I don't know why the city would need permanent easements on commission property, as they're two different entities with two different interests. So just bringing that to your attention.
Can we have that as a future agenda item? Because there could be a lot of discussion about that.
I think
And-
of recreational.
And improving the relationship with the city
Mhm.
by offering these recreational opportunities.
Yeah, I think,
It's just a feel-good thing, I think, that needs to happen.
you can have trails without having permanent easements.
I think you're right there.
So, Al and I just signed away perpetually the 1879 road from the West Auburn Village to the Mineral Spring Hotel. And it's incredible to know that 10 generations from now, people can walk down to the lake as long as you guys continue to permit that. But when this organization someday, because the filtration goes away, we have to have the foresight to protect those areas, for both, environment, recreation, and community.
So
Like I said, future agenda item, because I know we're running behind.
Yeah.
But I would love the rest of the commissioners to be able to have a discussion with that.
I want to put my 2 cents in with regard to recreation, because we look at it as a secondary source, but I think one of the things that our management of Lake Auburn has done is really taken people away from being directly involved with it and feeling like direct stakeholders. So oftentimes people don't really care about their water as long as it's coming clean out of the tap. Whereas I could say, lakes that have strong lake associations, those folks are on the lake. I can think of our property in Poland. That lake association is incredibly strong, and that no one gets away with anything around that lake. Not because anyone else cares, but because the people that use the lake care. And so when I think of recreation, what I think of is how to provide that direct access to people, so that way they're out there and they're realizing it as an actual physical resource, and a place that they enjoy, and a place that they like to go to, and a place that they continue to want to see pristine and protected, as opposed to knowing that it's a lake somewhere in Auburn where my drinking water comes from. So I just want to throw that plug in there.
I have more to say on it, but I'll save it for
Yeah.
for another agenda item. Next item, Lake Auburn Watershed Protection Commission to develop a comprehensive natural resource management plan that focuses firstly on drinking water protection. So that's another recommendation from the study to the commission, something to consider. Says the commission should work with local conservation groups and land trusts to purchase land in the watershed outside of Auburn. That's also something we can work on. I know we work with Androscoggin Land Trust quite a bit. So that's an option in the future as well.
Do you think either the considering a monitoring plan or consider a natural resource management plan is grant material? Because otherwise, we'll wait until budget, so it's possible.
Yeah, it's possible. Yeah. Yep. That's kind of my rundown of the executive summary. I know it's a lot, but I think that's a 2-pager condensed version of a lot of what's in this entire report. Any other questions or comments before I move on to the section 5?
I have a question about number 10.
Yeah.
Have we ever purchased or have easements on watershed land outside of Auburn?
Yeah, so we have conservation easements. One is up by Wilson Pond, it's Wilson Bluff Development. We have life estates that kind of go from Auburn into, I think it's Minot.
Yep.
And we have another conservation easement up closer towards Buckfield, Turner line. So yeah, we do, yeah,
So those are easements, so not.
they are easements, they're
you
not
don't own anything.
correct.
Oh, but didn't you years ago buy the Holbrook property?
So that, well, yeah, so technically as a life estate, yes, the commission owns that and the tenant has rights to live there until their heirs
But you own it.
pass or no longer want it. So yes, that is held by the
You know that
commission.
that property that was rebuilt right near the basin? The first
On,
house on Holbrook
on
Road.
Holbrook Road,
That first
yep,
house that was rebuilt several years ago
yep.
is now on the market.
Oh, it went under contract.
Is it under contract already?
It went under contract about 4 days after it went
Was
under.
it,
Oh,
they requested
boy.
$500,000 or something for that?
Probably.
It's really, really steep.
They were asking 400, and it went under contract right away, which makes me think that
Probably
they
500.
definitely got what they wanted.
Is that the one just up the hill from the boat landing there?
Yes, exactly, yep.
I think the better description is the one
Yes,
that's
it was, yeah.
not
Yeah, but then that-
just up the hill,
They
but
passed away.
on only a hill. Like, that's
Right.
all they've got.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, 10 acres were with that.
And 10 acres, yeah.
Any other or questions on the executive summary, and I'll keep rolling? I also included section 5, which is findings, synthesis, and holistic recommendations. So they have bulleted out items on this as well. The first one is, again, about the revising of the septic system requirements for Lake Auburn Watershed Overlay District Ordinance, which we've talked about many times now, looking at allowing mounted systems to get that 36-inch vertical separation. Next couple bullets talk about revising the phosphorus control ordinance to clarify the limit of the project area. I don't see an issue with that. Point number 3, require timber harvest and agricultural activities to meet same requirements as other land uses under phosphorus control ordinance. I don't see an issue with that. Point 4 is develop a clear set of standards for farm management. I think that would be helpful.
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
What are our standards? Because I know, like, this was an issue. There was a horse riding facility that had to seek approval. It was my understanding that they had to be signed off by
Yeah.
someone at AWD.
That one's, yeah, to me, yep,
Okay.
yep.
All right. And so, like, what were the standards?
I can show you. I can
Okay,
send
but
it.
we have a set of standards? that-
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, yeah.
yeah. They also talk about adjusting agricultural buffer strip from 75 feet to 100 feet, and I don't see any issue with that. Update the Lake Auburn Watershed Overlay District ordinance to reflect revised watershed boundary. Again, that was brought up at the planning board meeting last night. Planning board recommended to pass that on favorably to city council. And there's discussion of low impact development requirements again. That's repeated several times throughout this. There's more detail here if you're really interested in it. Environmental impacts, again, they talk about more development in the Auburn portion of the watershed results in greater water quality degradation and a higher risk of blooms. That's a theme throughout this. Low impact development techniques have a small positive effect on water quality, but does not ameliorate high risk of frequent algae blooms. So, as I said, even with increased development, if you have a ton of development going on and it's low impact development, that's not necessarily good for water quality. And they acknowledge that Auburn alone does not have the land use control tools to stave off water quality decline in Lake Auburn. So we need sustained collaboration with the upper watershed municipalities, and it's essential to achieve needed phosphorus load reductions. Looking at the economic piece of it, study found that expanding development in the watershed provided minimal overall net economic benefit when accounting for the benefits and costs of all affected stakeholders. That's a theme throughout this too. You'll read that several times. Specifically, the increased net benefits to the City of Auburn would be mostly or entirely offset by increased net costs to Auburn Water and Lewiston Water customers. resulting in negligible net economic benefit to the communities served by Lake Auburn. And lastly, getting into some of the final points of this document. They're again bulleted out. They recommend that the City of Auburn not seek to ease the current resource protection zoning. They talk about keeping the watershed forested and, you know, how that is linked to good water quality. They bring up again, working with the planning board and city council for ordinance revisions. Recommended that the City of Auburn shares this study with its partners. And let's see if there's anything else that I'm missing on here. I think all of those were included in the executive summary too.
Eric, can we move this board towards adopting their logging standards and recommendations?
Oh God, we just spent so much time.
I'll leave that to you.
Well, I mean, there's something that we can actually control and get moving on immediately. And that's our current logging practice.
I think I'd like to see that as well.
Yeah.
So
I know it's a
this
site by site sometimes too, but it
was
seems like,
recommended for changing city ordinance. So on our part, what is it that you'd like to see?
Well, for us to adopt these new standards, these new phosphorus control requirements for logging in our own watershed, and for our properties.
erosion control.
Oh, it's huge.
You're requesting to bring this up as an agenda item?
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, or just,
See what they
just
have and
instruct
what's there.
staff to work out their recommendations into the forestry policy that we've already adopted. I
I
don't
think
really need to
it
talk
won't be a
about
big makeover. I think it would just be a little bit of tweaking.
Just tweaking, yeah.
I know we had talked sometimes it's case by case situation, but just name what that is, you know, and then other circumstances would all have to follow something. You know, like right next to the shoreline, things that we saw.
Okay, so require timber harvest to meet the same requirements as other land uses under the phosphorus control ordinance.
Mm.
Currently, timber management and harvesting must be conducted,
Just kind of look at it and
It'd
see
just be
what
great to
phosphorus
leave
is.
knowing we actually are working towards making sure our lake stays even cleaner.
Let me just see if there's anything else I wanted to
Oh,
share with you guys.
Has anybody else noticed that this chart is messed up? The chart that's on page 61? I'm going, Sebago Lake isn't 635 acres, it's 29,000 acres.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm going, well,
Yeah.
that belongs here, this one belongs up
Yeah,
there.
I didn't know.
But Sebago Lake's 10 times bigger than ours. That's a question I get all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I can swim in Sebago Lake.
Yeah.
10 times
Yeah, I think
bigger than
they
ours.
mixed
It's deeper and bigger.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
And then the 3,000, acre zone that's, no anything, no boating, no anything. That's that whole lake. That's our whole
Exactly.
lake. So it's good comparisons if people just ask a general question about just want no swimming.
Yeah, I guess one last point on this was, the consultants acknowledged that they can only do these models and recommendations with a certain level of certainty.
Yeah.
And they understand that additional development raises risk of water quality degradation, whether due to phosphorus loading, pathogens, subsurface wastewater disposal, and even the increased risk resulting from individual parcel scale decision is small. Even though that's small, the aggregate impact of thousands of individual decisions over the coming decades is what matters. So it's kind of that compounding effect. So that's in there for everybody's reference. Have any other questions? Happy to talk to you guys about it.
I saw an interesting observation they made, they're talking about regulation of the septic systems. It's, almost every page talks about no more build out, and then they mention revising the septic ordinance could result in 100 new homes.
Yeah.
They admit that's a contradiction,
Yeah.
then they explain it away, basically on page 60, to say that restriction on developable land are better left to base and resource protection zoning than to septic design standards.
Right.
You know, you can look at septic design on a very scientific level, that's one thing, but, they're admitting that if you do that, you're gonna get 100 new homes in the watershed. They said if you really wanna protect the lake, do it through zoning instead of septic design. That's an interesting comment that I haven't heard brought up in public.
Yeah, I haven't heard that brought up.
So that's something, I think that's something for this,
I think it's funny, I've been talking with my friends about that for years now, that using the septic systems is not smart. We shouldn't be using ag land to protect the lake. We should have developed a different zone years ago that was specific to it. And we would have gotten rid of so many headaches at this point, I think.
but at the same token, I don't know if I'd recommend doing that, because if you simply change it to zone around the lake that you can't build to protect the lake, you're gonna get the same net benefit that you're getting now. I don't see the usefulness of that exercise. I understand what they're saying.
Because it doesn't get grouped under ag for everything, you're always saying, with the exception of the watershed, overlay district. The ag would be treated differently.
Well, I'll put it to you this way.
If you zone all the land around the lake to be non-buildable, there's gonna be zero tax benefit to the city for that.
Right, so.
If they say your land is not buildable.
Yeah, but right now it's valued at $800 an acre if it's in the ag zone, so, what the hell benefit is that to the city anyway? But Sid, I would propose, think about it this way. If we were to update the septic design and requirements, it allows us to force anyone redoing their septic system to now utilize the most modern and septic systems that integrate the best practices
And that's great.
and protect the lake. The lake, if we take care of building and development with zoning, right? So, yes, I hear what you're saying. You're saying, well, there's no net benefit with regard to restricting the development, but there is a net benefit because it would allow us to do something like require updating of septic systems and personal waste disposal systems, right? So I think when we move forward, we gotta think about like what's the intent, right? What's the intent of what we're trying to do, and keep our eye on the intent rather than worry about like, well, this is the way we've always done it, it's worked this way. Well, yeah, it could still work that way, but there's also a potential benefit by updating certain things.
Yeah, on septic system, who's here, by chance, has responded to a homeowner that has said their septic tank is backed up? Has anyone ever gone out to someone's house?
Yes.
Well, the first question I have for them is, when's the last time you had a pump? Oh, you have to have a pump? When was the system built? I mean, there's more than the tank? So, I think one of the key things, Sid, is when they change this, is for this board to bring up something like a responsible management entity. Because that forces all real estate transactions, new homeowners, to get on board with a utility. If somebody goes around and they check the tanks, I mean, Mary Jane Dillingham used to do how many inspections a year? How many times, we had programs with Lynn Richards, right? That's something that the commission has always supported, is making sure people have the information, the tools to get their septic, get their shit fixed. But a responsible management entity actually goes out and as a requirement of a new permit, you join it, you pay $20, $30 a month. It's no different than a sewer bill. And someone takes care of it, because really nobody knows how to take care of that stuff. I mean, less than 1% of homeowners. That's a big issue. So responsible management entity, RME, and that is going to be huge for this lake.
Don't we give a credit back if they have a septic, private sector system, or what is that? How do we do that in billing?
Lewiston?
Yeah,
No, they just don't get billed.
they just don't get billed, so they could get billed. We're sending them the water bill. Yeah. That wouldn't be that high today.
Didn't mean to turn you off, Erica.
No, that's why I was
I agree with you.
I'm done with that.
You saw the passion come out of me. I've done a lot of shit.
Did we want to end meetings at 5:30? Just throwing it out there.
I think that's the discussion and last being sensitive to time, and we could, how much time do we wanna go and who wants to stay, right, with some of the discussions?
I've gotta be out of here at 6:15, I got another meeting.
I'm gonna leave around 4:15. I guess I get to be somewhere at 6.
We could take our agenda items on the bottom to move them forward to the next meeting. And the recommendation of talking about the rec trails and requiring, and tweaking maybe the timber harvest as part of even your environmental, report that you normally do.
Yeah, I move we do exactly that, move agenda items 6 through 11 to the next meeting, add as an agenda item to the next meeting the proposed timber harvest changes identified by Commissioner Bilodeau, and adjourn the meeting.
I'll second that.
I'd like to make a motion to revise that to remove item 7 and have Kevin present that, because that's going to be something that needs to be done in a timely fashion. So making a
friendly
motion.
amendment, motion for friendly amendment?
I'm making a motion to amend to leave item 7 on the current agenda and complete it while moving 8 through 11 to the next meeting, along with the timber harvest yet.
Plus 6.
6 is done, right?
I just done that.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I gotta check off.
I know,
gotta
Dan
check
said 6,
off.
but you had just finished it.
I'll
yeah.
second that friendly amendment. Which seconds on it?
So all you did was remove 7,
7, yeah.
so we'll discuss 7 now,
Well, I made a
We're
motion
gonna
to
vote
amend,
on
and now we have to
the
vote on the motion to amend.
to amend, yeah.
Yeah.
Any discussion on the motion to amend?
If we could just get him to change his motion, it might just be smoother.
Oh, look.
Well, I suppose we could, and then whoever seconded it.
Well, we've got a motion and a second, we take the vote on your motion.
Yeah.
All right, let's just vote on the I was
The
wondering,
amendment.
one other friendly amendment, I guess, to add to yours is, didn't you want to add the recreational use as a topic for an agenda item for next April for the April meeting? Because we just really have Alan a little bit up on the.
Well, I think that's just gonna be in the new procedure to add agenda items, right? I can just get with another commissioner and we can forward the information.
So we're gonna vote on your motion
To amend.
to amend. Okay, and you seconded it.
I just seconded it.
All those
Ready
in
to
favor?
vote.
All those in favor? Anyone opposed?
No.
Okay,
So one opposed, yeah.
So now his motion is amended. Any discussion on that? All in favor of that?
then we're good? Okay.
So Kevin, hurry up,
Septic
get done,
update.
and then we're out
I
of
can
here.
be quick. You've heard several different topics on the septic. At this point, we have a 36-inch soil requirement, and looking at it technically, I think the main subsurface was updated in 2015. So if you look at all the engineered systems, there's not a comprehensive list, there's not, so as a staff person, I'm looking at it saying, what are we really looking at? What's Erica gonna see on these sites? And it's gonna be site specific. The changes that in the plan and what Auburn's looking to do is be able to allow those mounds above the 36. And we don't really know the impacts yet, quite honestly. With drinking water program, city got a response back, kind of vague. I've had another conversation and said really, because of the expanded, getting 100 or more homes, that's the real issue. I mean, I definitely agree with Mary Ann saying changing existing systems and improving what a replacement system could be and having those standards, that's important. It's the expansion of possible homes and having those new septic systems put in I think one thing that was brought up that Erica might have gone to was Lake Auburn cannot maintain excellent water quality in the future without full participation of the other watershed towns. More development cannot be allowed in the Auburn portion of the watershed, even with low impact development requirements implemented in Auburn. So it really comes down to the septics and those added driveways and everything. So septic systems, at this point, the comparisons that were made, you know, I really think that we're gonna have to look at it in more detail on a site-by-site. We've basically looked at some of the critical areas. I think we had a study where there was some slope design, and that's some of it. So as I get into this piece, I'm going to look at it again. I'll come back with a more detailed report. But at this point, the critical thing is, once you have fecal numbers, I'm jumping around because it's pretty overwhelming, to be honest with you, with the amount of standards. Our standards aren't a phosphorus standard for our waiver. There's no phosphorus standard. We've talked about algae, we've talked about fish kills. When those things happen, we looked at what were the triggers for the waiver violation. So the state has basically said if you exceed the standards that we do have, which is fecal numbers, which is turbidity standards, those type of things, having a failed system because it's an engineered system that's new and improved by DEP may not be what we really want. So until we look at the different, I know Dan has some experience with some stuff proposed. I think we're gonna need more detail on what's actually be approved or available for a toolbox before we can really support, yes, let's adopt those changes. That's what I want to see before I make a recommendation to you guys to say.
Two things I can add that this group can move on. Eric mentioned a couple days ago, we were chatting, that they've actually hired a state expert just for septic design. We all know who he is, or we used to know who he was, David Rourke. So I don't know if he's going to be present at the next hearing, but that would be key. The other key, I think, is for the Auburn Water District to amend the bylaws for the protection of Lake Auburn, specifically to give the power to this group to basically require a responsible management entity. And I think those would be the fair ways to address the actual concerns with septic systems. And that just, go against the science and disallow, this to move forward. I mean, that's my personal opinion.
Kevin, could I ask some clarification? Am I hearing that you are sort of hesitant to give us more information because essentially what you're saying is like you're not necessarily convinced that whatever's being proposed is actually better than what we have? As far as, okay. So that's really, that's what you're trying to tease out right now, is that?
So they put it out there and said, we looked at mound systems, drip systems. When you go actually to the subsurface rules and what's allowed, there's proprietary devices. Right now it's very broad. And I think before we get into looking at and saying, accepting, yes, very broad, now it becomes on staff to be looking at what's the one, maybe approved at DEP, but is that something that we want approved in a sensitive watershed? We have boundaries, we have setbacks, those are fine. But right now we have existing homes that are close, and we've afforded them to expand their system or replace their system on our property. So I think we've shown that we definitely want to work with people.
Look at alternatives.
But before I make a recommendation, I think we need to know what exact systems are those. Drip systems, something that's kind of missing from this report that we have information on that our experts may be able to give this better. A couple years ago, one of our engineers, and I think it was the University of Maine Orono, frozen ground conditions are some of the highest transport of phosphorus to Lake Auburn. Low impact development does not matter when the ground's frozen. These are the conditions right now that create the biggest problems for deposition. So if you have driveways and parking lots, you have rooftops, those contribute in addition to the septic system. So 100 homes isn't as simple as a septic system and low impact development. It's the worst case scenario for those. And I think to Dan's point, yes, I think having better monitoring, have better outreach, and having some mechanisms to be able to make sure, so No Name Pond, we've got 10 community systems, goes to a public system that we monitor. We saved those homes, we saved that community and stopped polluting through septics to No Name Pond. So I think, around Lake Auburn, we don't have a lot along Lake Shore, but as you look at the 100 possible new homes, those are the ones that, once you build it, you're not gonna be able to undo it. And back to, your point, Steve, they were talking about taking properties off the tax rolls. So if you add property on the tax rolls and something's not cited right, something's not working, the wrong septic system, and we have pollution, it's that much more expensive to undo it. It's filtration, it's that much more expensive. Even if you do filtration, it's that much more expensive to actually treat the water. So,
I think, go ahead.
So to wrap it up, yes, I'm hesitant to give a recommendation. I think there needs to be more details. It's so broad right now, saying more systems approved by DEP in the subsurface than what we're seeing.
I think my problem is we're all left with a lot of questions because there hasn't been a presentation by FB Environmental on this study. So the city spent $100,000 on this study with no, they gave us this report, it's great, but everyone's got more questions than answers. And I know the city is working to try to get the resources together to get that FB Environmental back, to review this study, present it, and have a chance to ask questions. They're the ones that presented this data, and here we are, we've got the data, but it just kind of begs more questions than answers. So I'm really hoping that will occur. They can come back and tell us their thoughts behind these, because I have tons of questions about what they put out there. There's contradictions, and there's some good recommendations, and I think some bad recommendations. And I've got tons of questions, and it's going to be very hard to answer them or make sense of them unless we're presented with what they put down. I think that's a critical part of this, and I hope it happens.
And certainly in 2010, we had, when CEI did an assessment, and CDM Smith, they came and presented it, and you get that interpretation, you get that question and answer on the details. I mean, realistically, I'm sure of the 100 potential that they looked at, 70 or pick some number may be perfectly harmless, far enough away from a watershed, slope issues, soil issues, may be perfectly fine.
If this is going to be better for the lake, show me. How is this going to be better? How is this going to make the lake better than it is today?
No promise to do no harm. Yeah. I like the monitoring system though. We're doing a septic full study and I think I would add that no matter where we have septic systems. Because if they do go undetected.
As a commissioner, when we look at this again, I don't know how everyone else feels, what would be most helpful for me, because I'm hearing apprehension built in around this idea that if those standards change, these houses will be built. And I absolutely recognize where the apprehension is coming from. I think it's the concern about that many houses being built is a real one. I just want to make sure when I hear your feedback around septic design, that the feedback is really around the septic design, separate from the concept that that would automatically mean houses are built, because there are other things we can do to advocate, and that might actually be helpful as a commission when we do take a position to say, well, yeah, this is supported, but this is only something we can support if the following measures are taken, right?
Definitely look at that.
And it seems like it could be a consideration after this was checked and this was checked and this was checked, not a blanket, just go buy the system if you want it.
All right.
Things need to be tried first, and it would be a fourth option, or maybe considered. But yeah, thanks for that. And I'm gonna go listen next Wednesday, and hopefully the experts are there as well, so probably a good idea for you to listen. Thanks. I make the motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor? Anyone opposed?
Thanks, everybody, we were almost on time, which is good, 'cause I know we got the